Volgende naweek kies 1426 DA-afgevaardigdes om nuwe leier in Nelson Mandela Bay. Die twee voorloperkandidate is Dr. Wilmot James en Mmusi Maimane. Helen Zille se opvolger neem 'n uiters belangrike plek in die plaaslike politiek in. As waghond van die demokrasie, maar ook, so hoop sommige DA-loyaliste, as profetiese stem. Vanaand se debat tussen Maimane en James werk as volg. Elke kandidaat kry 1 minuut om te sê waarom hy die pos van DA-leier moet kry. Daarna pak ons die groot beleidsvraagstukke in 'n gesprek wat ek sal modereer. Ons sluit dan af met een of twee kykersvrae van Twitter, so tweet gerus. Dr. James, I'm starting with you. Your surname is before Mr. Maimane's in the alphabet. Why should the DA elect you as its new leader above Mr. Maimane?
Let me say that I have the willingness, I have the ability, and I have the courage to lead the DA in a new strategic direction that focuses on communicating with voters about the issues that affect them. This is to do with jobs, safety, education, health, and shelter, and do it on the basis of being a principled party, being a unified party, being a growing party, being a party with new ideas, and being a winning party. And the reason why we want to win so that we can govern more, and the reason why we want to govern more is so that we can take care of the needs that are front and center in the minds of voters in South Africa today.
Mr. James, thank you very much. Mr. Maimane, your pitch.
Baie dankie en ek is baie bly om hier te wees. I think it's an important time in South Africa. The DA faces to be the only party that is the alternative for the people of this country. We have to be that party that communicates a vision for South Africa. I think historically we've been a party that communicates what we stand against, how we oppose the ANC. Now the function is about articulating a vision for tomorrow. That vision must be about an inclusive economy, an economy where, in fact, South Africans who have been left out of the economy can become a part of it. It must be a vision that articulates a non-racial South Africa, South Africa where the color of your skin does not matter. In fact, it matters in as far as the shape of your nose, that we build the non-racial party, that without fail we must be a party that attracts activists, that attracts people that can stand up and say, I stand for these principles, I want to communicate them to South Africa. So I stand here today as a South African who understands the history of our country, who understands the effects of apartheid, who understands what in fact it means to sit in a leadership place and be able to say, I believe that tomorrow must be better than yesterday. So I want to articulate that vision for South Africa and grow the party going forward.
Time's up. Mr. Maimane, I'm starting with you with the questions. You mentioned the ideal of a non-racial South Africa. How much longer do you think should race be a basis for economic redress in this country?
Look, there's no doubt about the fact that many South Africans are left out of the economy and the majority of those are in fact black. It is still a critical factor. It's still a proxy for disadvantage. And the issue that we must focus on is the fact that we must address the education of young black South Africans. The fact of the matter is that a child who's in Waterkloof gets a better education than a child who's in Mamelodi. So I think when it comes to economic redress, we must have a 5-year plan that addresses, that measures how we're doing on that basis, but that what we've got to be focused on is making sure that we focus on black advancement and making sure that young black South Africans can find equity into the economy.
Dr. James?
Race still matters. It's not credible to say it doesn't matter anymore, but it matters less, but it still matters. There are two things to worry about. The first is what you do in terms of the backlog when it comes to educational qualifications, and I believe we need corrective action in the sense that we must make sure that there's accelerated training and education for people who were excluded in the past and disadvantaged. Firstly. Secondly, when it comes to business opportunities, we need a different approach to dealing with stimulating entrepreneurship and business opportunities in underserved areas. And basically what needs to be done is to extend business support into every corner of South Africa and provide special opportunities for venture capital for entrepreneurs who were excluded in the past.
In order to be the party which is the vehicle for what you've just described, should the DA compromise on its traditional liberal values? Mr. James, Dr. James.
Well, I said that I would lead a principled party, and a principled party means that we would want to advance freedom. We want to see the protection of the rule of law and equality before the law. We want to see support for a market economy, and we want to make sure that there is an approach of non-racialism. Those are the principles. They are liberal democratic principles, and those principles are to be extended and not diluted.
Not compromised.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Maimane?
No, not at all. I think that we've had a great tradition. We've held on to our liberal values. So I actually hold the view that we've stuck to our principles. We've maintained, we're the only party that's still fighting for a non-racial South Africa. But I want to address this issue because I think very often people like to take the label of liberal and simply apply it across all contexts and simply say it must remain the same as it is all over the world. I think here in South Africa we have a unique opportunity. We be able to address what liberalism can respond in issues of economic development. How do we talk about the rights of individuals? How do we uphold the supremacy of the rule of law? How do we make sure that all citizens in this country know that their rights are protected under the Constitution? We have to be able to articulate that. We have to be able to take it forward. I think we've been successful. Now it's a function of about saying who are the other South Africans that share those common values across a non-racial basis so that we can work together.
In an attempt, though, to take the party forward, did these liberal values which you describe and which Dr. James has described, did they not slip in November 2013 when the DA voted in the National Assembly in favour of the Employment Equity Amendment Act and later did what party leader Helen Zille described as a plane crash, a spectacular U-turn? Was there not a slip of the liberal values, and how can we trust the DA not to repeat that mistake? Well,
fortunately, that's a very important point. I was not part of the leadership in Parliament at that point when that decision was made to vote for a particularly racist bill, in my humble opinion. And I think I agree. It was a plane crash. It was an error on our part. We should not have supported a bill that articulates quotas. What we should be doing is rather going back to our principles that say, let's build a non-racial party. Let's build a party that opens up opportunities. But we accepted that fact. We certainly went out and said it was a mistake. Building forward, we recognize the fact that we've got to build a party that is non-racial. And I think my commitment here is to say, having watched what legislation is coming up, particularly on the expropriation bill, we want to ensure that the rights of South Africans on a non-racial basis are put forward.
Dr. James.
So you know what? On the BEE arrangement, we were wrong, in fact. We were wrong. What we need to do, because what happened was that version of BEE we modified in order to create our own scorecard. But the effect of it in practice is to enrich the already rich. So it's an example of crony capitalism. So we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to say that you need to support black entrepreneurship, but you have to do it in a different way. So we were actually wrong on that issue, and I think we should start again.
On the National Development Plan, which doesn't speak to these issues primarily, but to economic growth and making progress as a country, you've said recently in the last week or so that the DA should guard against flirting with the ANC's NDP. Yet in 2012, you described parts of the plan as overall an excellent document in a speech in London. What is your position on the NDP?
You see, when you go to voters and you offer the DA's plan, what you have to do is offer a plan that's different to the ANC. The NDP is the ANC's plan. And our plan is the plan for growth and jobs. It's always been our plan. It was accepted by the DA. And that is what the offer is. The NDP is a useful document. It's got lots of nice facts in it that one can use. But it is not the DA's offer because we're confusing the voters. When we speak about the NDP, when we incorporate the NDP, what we're saying to voters is, vote for us. We're just another version of the ANC. We must be an alternative to the ANC, not an alternate ANC.
Mr. Maimane, does the DA on the NDP have a real alternative to it?
You see, I find it fascinating. We flip-flop on issues. We support the NDP, then we don't. We support redress, then we vote for bills that are racist fundamentally. That's not what I'm trying to build. I'm trying to build a party that is consistent here. And here on this particular issue, I think the authors of the NDP, who are independent of government, in fact recognize the fact that what the DA has been saying about a market-based economy is important. What the DA has been saying about building infrastructure is important. So in many ways, I think the NDP is actually an articulation of some of the DA principles and values on economic growth. There are very strong similarities. I don't support everything that's in the DA on the NDP. Of course, there are elements of it that are flawed, that are wrong. For example, that focuses on how we do land reform. There are some challenges there. But I think overall, it articulates our stance point, our views on economic growth, and how we can empower small businesses. So I think going forward, we need to be able to tell South African voters that, in fact, here's the plan, here are the solutions that we must put forward in South Africa, and some of them are expressed in the NDP.
Can you speak to the inconsistency, Dr. James?
There's no inconsistency. I led the process of developing the DA's plan for growth and jobs. It passed through all the constitutional structures of the DA. That is our plan. And that plan has been forgotten, and that plan has been actually shelved by the current leadership. Starting in May of last year, nobody speaks about it. It's an accepted policy of the DA. Suddenly, there's no discussion about it anymore, and it's disappeared. So I think that's where the strategic drift came in. And presently, the DA is drifting strategically. It doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know where it's heading. It flirts with the NDP. It basically is becoming we're not becoming an alternative to the ANC, but we're becoming an alternate ANC under the current leadership, and I intend to set that right.
I'm going to stay with you for the moment and ask you whether this was, instead of drift, not a managed shift under Helen Zille towards policies which would find more popular support.
Well, I don't know how you would describe it, but decisions are taken collectively, and you stick with those decisions. And there hasn't been a change in the decision-making structures in terms of our overall policy direction when it comes to growth. So what has happened is strategic drift. And the consequence of that is that the voters don't know what it is we stand for. And I intend to set that right if elected as leader.
Mr. Maimane?
I disagree fundamentally, and Dr. James was part of the leadership. It was part of our federal executive that took some very important decisions about this issue. I think what happened is that when we marched, give you another example, we marched Tuli House to say to South Africans we want to create a plan for real jobs. That was not strategic drift. That was simply saying we want real jobs. We want jobs that are created in the private sector. We want small businesses to grow. That's not strategic drift. That's sticking to our principles of saying South Africans who start small businesses can go it forward. We've seen growth. We've seen South Africans who understand the fact that the ANC, there's clear blue water between us and the ANC. The ANC talks about non-racialism, but they practice the opposite. They talk about the Constitution, but they practice the opposite. We've been quite clear in our defense of the Constitution. We've been quite clear about the issues we've driven that are economic growth. We've focused on what Eskom must do. We've focused on the alternatives that we want to put before Eskom. While the ANC is talking about a state-centered development, we've argued quite the contrary. And so I'm of the view that, in fact, we've built on our principles, we've communicated them to more voters are hearing our message, and I think going forward, we need to be able to continue on some of those principles.
Mr. Maimane, you give a lot of credit, by implication, to the federal leader of the DA, Helen Zille, who was presiding over the party when many of these things that you've just mentioned happened. Why did she decide to leave? Was it time?
I think it was a difficult decision. Helen Zille has been a phenomenal leader for our party. She's grown our party. It was a key time where she sat back and for her own reasons, she took a decision to say, look, she'd not be available for leadership. Timing is always tough in any political environment. It could be too early or too late. It's irrelevant now. What's more important is the fact that the delegates of the DA will go to Congress on the 9th and 10th of May, elect a new leadership that will take this party forward. Many people, when Tony Leon stepped down, said, oh my goodness, is it time, is it not time? But the party has grown subsequent to that. And I'm saying to you right here today, timing or no timing, on the 9th and 10th of May, the delegates will appoint a new leadership, will take this party forward, and I'm almost certain the party will grow.
Dr. James, should we not look back at Zille?
I argued in private and within the party that Helen Zille should have stayed on and taken us through the local government elections. She is the party's biggest brand when it comes to good governance. She has governed the city of Cape Town extremely well, immensely competent, and the Western Cape government. And therefore, to the voters, she represents good governance on a local level. So my argument was for her to take us through the local government election and then to step down after that. But I'm afraid that is not how it turned out.
So you tried to convince her to stay?
Yes.
Did the DA not, however, reach some kind of growth ceiling under Helen Zille? Dr. James first.
Well, I don't think a growth ceiling. I think that she served the party very well. And she still has, a lot of energy, and she could have grown the DA some more. But she's recognized that she has reached the limit, and so that's what we have presently.
Mr. Maimane?
No, I think Premier Helen Zille still plays a key role. She serves as still the Premier of the Western Cape. It's not to suggest that when she's not in the leadership seat, that in fact the entire organization will change. The fact of the matter is that she captained a very, very good team, in my humble opinion, of which many other key players came on board. Her role will still continue in the party in a different role. And I think that's an important thing. Why now what the issue is, we are here to elect a new captain. The team will then take the organization forward. So I don't think that this idea of a ceiling has been one that's been touted about before. People said we wouldn't make it past 10%, past 20%, and I think people still put the same limitations on us. We'll still grow.
Very briefly before we break, one of the important current constituencies of the Democratic Alliance is coloured voters in the Western Cape, without whose support the DA would not have been governing in that province. Mr. Maimane first and then Dr. James. Can you tell your coloured voters in the Western Cape tonight that you have their back?
I have the back of every South African. colored voters included, white voters included, black voters included, South Africans. What we are going to build going forward is a party that shares values, that says to South Africans, if you agree with us on these values of a market-based economy, if you agree with us that we need to build a decent education, then we can come together and say, let's build a party going forward. And under that leadership, when we can see growth and see change, we can ensure that the rights of all South Africans are protected and of all races are protected. So I'm in the business of building a party for all South Africans, and my invitation to even colored South Africans is that you'll be able to pick up the vision that we want to build forward and be a part of the future of this country. Dr.
James, do you have a message for this constituency?
Well, what's really important is that the services that have been delivered to the coloured community have developed a sense of trust with the party, and so there's a authenticity when it comes to the relationship between the DA and the coloured community. And what's really important is to look after their interests. And their interests are the same as other people's interests. They just configures differently regionally. But the interests are jobs, education, stability of the family, dealing with crime, dealing with drugs in particular, in that community. And so what's required as we grow the party is to take them along. And what we have to do is take special care to do that by addressing their needs, and their needs are very specific. They have to do with jobs, they do have to do with crime and drugs, and those questions have to be addressed by the DA.
To the issue of growth, we'll return right after this break. Bly ingeskakel, tweet gerus tydens die handelsflitse 'n vraag aan die kandidaate met @kykNET en gebruik die hashtag Insig. Die DA-debat gaan net hierna voort.